Brilliant. So we've just heard from leading climate scientists about the destructiveness of a warming climate and the rapidly narrowing window to keep temperatures below 1.5. We've heard from Mr. Franco some reassuring words around the fact that there are examples that multilateralism is still working, but there are significant challenges ahead. The question now is how can we revitalize and really bring new momentum to the international climate agenda against the backdrop of increasing geopolitical tensions, trade disputes, regional conflicts, all of which are contributing to pushing the climate agenda down the political agenda, and they also could contribute to watering down climate ambition as a result of pressures on national budgets, but also on local economies, as well as the rise in concerted efforts to really frame climate action as damaging to business competitiveness, or as the COP30 president calls it, the rise in economic denial, which looks to discredit climate policies. So with all of this in mind, in this panel, we're going to be exploring what are opportunities for national and subnational actors to bring renewed focus and momentum to the climate agenda, and what steps are needed to accelerate real-world action in the lead up to COP30. So with me to discuss all of this, I'm joined by a brilliant panel of speakers. So to my left is Yana Acconcia, Director for International Affairs and Climate Finance at DG CLIMA at the European Commission. Yana has a long track record of working across a wide range of briefs within the Commission. Next is Professor Christina Voigt. Christina is Professor of Law at the University of Oslo. She's a renowned expert in international environmental law and has served as the first co-chair of the Paris Agreement's Compliance and Implementation Committee. Next is Secretary Yana Garcia, who leads the California Environmental Protection Agency and has a wealth of experience working on a wide range of legal and policy matters pertaining to the environment, including as Special Assistant Attorney General to the California Attorney General and in various leadership roles within the California EPA. Next in line is Nancy Gillis, lead on innovation and strategy at Scope 3 peer group. Nancy has worked extensively on decarbonization sustainability, including at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development and as the lead of the First Movers Coalition at the World Economic Forum. And last but not least, we have Luisia Franco Machado, who is a UN Young Leader for Sustainable Development Goals. Luisia works on digital rights and data justice issues and is the founder and executive director of Equilabs. We've got a lot of ground to cover over the next 45 minutes or so. We're also going to aim to leave some questions for the audience, so I'm going to ask the speakers to keep your responses short and concise if possible. We'll start by taking stock of the current context and think about how that might shape climate ambition. Yana, if I can start with you, the EU has been at the center of significant geopolitical and economic tensions, including as a result of the ongoing war in Ukraine, US tariff turbulence. We've also seen the rise of populist movements across a number of EU member states, and there's been growing emphasis in the political debate on the need to prioritize business competitiveness over climate policy. Could you comment on how this context may shape EU ambition on climate going forward?
Thank you, and good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. And before zooming in on what the European Union is doing, I would like to look at the present situation after the somber picture painted by the scientists. It's not the scientists painting the picture. The picture is difficult, but there is also another side of the coin, which is the economy. And that's also a bit what Ambassador Benoit was saying at the beginning. The economy has moved in the last years. And in spite of all the geopolitical tensions and the headwinds against climate action, the momentum of the green transition is continuing. And I think the economic arguments and also the economic analysis underpinning them has never been stronger. It's clear that climate action is not only a necessity, and that we've seen before, but it's an opportunity. Let's look at GDP growth. In 2023, 10% of global GDP growth has come from the clean sectors. 30% of the growth of the European Union has come from the clean sector. 20% of the growth in China. 60%, 6% only in the United States. So, and 5% in India. And this may be, let's see how it will be in the future. But this is to say that for the EU, it's very clear. The green transition means growth. There has always been recently a report of the OECD and UNDP showing that actually climate action does not does not make any harm to the economy. On the contrary, if we compare a current policy scenario to an ambitious NDC scenario, NDC that would take us to 1.7, in fact, the GDP in 2050 is going to be the same. The GDP growth is going to be the same because there will be some cost, but there will also be some benefits, the economic activity generated by climate action. But there has to be investment, and I will come back to it in a moment. And this doesn't count the damage avoided, well, everything that you have heard before. So if anything would stay the same, ambitious and the NDC would still take us to a GDP in 2050 that is slightly higher than what we would have on a current scenario. So this is the economic argumentations underpinning the European Union position, which is we are staying the course on the commitments that we have taken for 2030, 2050, and we are taking new ambitious commitment for 2040. Looking at 2030, we have an ambitious target of reducing our emissions of 55% in 2030 compared to 1990, and we are on track. It's been proven because last week we had the report of the member states' national energy and climate plans. We are on track for 54%, so almost 55%. I don't think many other countries and economic blocs in the world can say the same. And the European Green Deal, launched in 2019, has proven incredibly resilient. It has withstood the brutal energy crisis that was caused by the equally brutal Russian aggression to Ukraine. It has generated a cleaning of the power sector that we would never think possible. In 2024, almost half of the European Union electricity came from renewable sources, plus about a quarter from nuclear, and only 10% of coal. This is not something we would have imagined very, very recently. Of course, I'm not saying that everything is perfect. There are sectors where we still have some work to do. We have to do more on, for example, decarbonizing transport. We have to do more on decarbonizing heat generation in buildings. And we have to do more to decarbonize the industry. And most of all, we need to create a very strong business argument for industry to continue to invest in Europe. Because it's very clear that in Europe, like elsewhere, the transition is not going to happen if we don't have businesses and people behind us. The people are still behind us, by the way, because if you look at the Eurobarometers, people are less vocal, but they're still expecting the European Union to take action on climate. So make no mistake of it, in spite of all the disinformation. We have to work on industry, and we are doing things. The Clean Industrial Deal was published in February, and it is trying to make this business case. And I finish with what has been published today, which is a new state aid framework that is going to support the Clean Industrial Deal. We are going to streamline and facilitate the state aid framework to support all the clean technology industry, all the energy intensive industry in their decarbonization. So the message is invest in Europe, it's going to be a good business. Very last point, sorry Caterina, but I've talked about 2040, but I didn't say that next week we expect to adopt as Commission our target for 2040, which is going to be a reduction of 90%. And that is in line with science and respecting the carbon budget that is the European Union fair share. So we are getting there, and sorry for having been a bit long, I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Positive to hear that the EU is going to stay the course. We look forward to seeing the details of the 2040 target announcement next week. Nancy, if I can come to you next, looking at the current context, business commitments that were made over the recent years on climate were seen as a sign that the business community had sort of recognized the scale of the challenge and was lining up to deliver on climate. But we've seen sort of a raft of businesses withdrawing from major climate initiatives, dropping climate commitments, pushing to water down climate policy. Does that signal that sort of there's been a change of heart within the business community, or perhaps were the previous commitments just a bit of a PR exercise? And what does this mean for climate action going forward from the business community? And if I can ask, sorry, to keep responses just relatively short.
Yeah, no, definitely. So it's neither. You asked me, is it one or the other? It's neither. So first of all, I just want to, and we had talked about this, it is not the role of business, and I'm not a business person, but I've worked a lot with business. It's not the role of business to carry the climate agenda, right? What does business do? Business provides products and services that we all buy, and they provide our jobs in doing so, right? So what has happened with business is business responds to three things, again, what I've seen. One, it responds to the direct environment that it finds itself in. And right now, as we just saw from the presenters, the direct environment is increasingly one that is resource constrained. It is one in which you've got assets that are probably going to burn up. You've got workers who won't be able to come. So you're going to have continuing commitment because it just responds to that. It responds to what government tells it to respond to in two ways: a carrot response and a stick response, right? Regulations being the stick response, and we have increasingly seen a lack of stick response in the sense of stepping back from some of the what was perceived to be regulatory requirements. Sometimes that's not a bad thing, actually. And then the carrot response, there was a tremendous carrot that was in the United States. That carrot was one of the biggest. It was in fact an entire bush of carrots. It was num-num carrots. Amazingly, not surprisingly, business does not like it when it's not just a carrot that's disappeared. The whole bushel disappeared. In fact, I think the garden has disappeared. So what is business? It's not business's responsibility, but business is essential because of the influence it can provide for us for climate change. Where is it right now? It is responding to the context, so it is very much paying attention to what climate change results are. These are people who are doing business, right? The lack of availability of resources, the concerns about staffing, price of energy. It's responding to the regulatory pressures, and increasingly it does want to see from countries, from governments, not necessarily a one or the other, but just a stability, since business also doesn't turn on a dime, in the same way that you don't decide to run your household one way, and then the next week later you're like, well, honey, I think we're gonna move to another country, we're gonna go ahead and put our children in other schools. Those types of gyrations in one's personal life is comparable to what the gyrations have been in business world, I think, over the last 6 months. And one last thing is that you asked me the question, and we're celebrating COP. I think increasingly, and this is, I know, the businesses that I've been speaking to, COP is no longer the, quote unquote, how we say, fit for purpose, just because so much of this environment is now so regional. So there are many more examples now of paying attention, especially as there's been conversations about tariffs or energy availability, renewable energy availability, that a global conference, the impact of that peaked at Paris, and what's really now interesting is what the different markets or where those companies are working would operate.
Great, thank you. And we might come back to some of those questions later in the discussion. Secretary Garcia, if I can come to you next. Subnational actors, local governments, cities, regions are a vital piece of the puzzle to deliver on climate. There's a question now as what levers remain to them in the context of sort of national governments facing sort of growing fiscal constraints, national governments in some cases not seeing climate as a priority. Could you comment on that and perhaps reflect in particular on what scope there is for local decision makers in the US to act in the current context?
Sure, thank you, and a pleasure to be here. and participating in London Climate Action Week for the first time for California, but certainly a time when we wanted to prioritize our presence here given the situation that we find ourselves in at the national level. So I do want to say, just even dovetailing a little bit off the points just made, particularly with respect to a lot of the sort of pulling back of much of the authority that California relies on. I want to emphasize and underscore that these are not done deals quite yet. We are still pushing back on what are the unlawful rescissions of our authority to regulate emissions in California. That includes tailpipe emissions, that includes setting vehicle standards for zero-emission vehicles, and it also includes simply regulating nitrogen oxide, NOx emissions across the state. And so it's, I would just say that the story is not ended yet on those authorities, but want to share a little bit about how we're leveraging other tools in the meantime. So as we're pushing back in court on some of the unlawful rescissions, not only of our regulations, but also of much of the investment that came through federally over the course of the last few years, investments in renewable energy infrastructure, but also in education, healthcare access, transit and transportation dollars, et cetera. We're working with a coalition of national and subnational governments quite broadly. And we were just here to mark the 10-year anniversary of the signing of the Paris Agreement. And I think that that peak is really momentous, not only for what that agreement yielded in and of itself with nation states, but also for us in particular. We launched the Under 2 Coalition, which is a coalition of subnational governments that are now 200 subnational governments representing 50% of global GDP that remain committed to the tenets in the Paris Agreement, that remain committed to climate action in their subnational jurisdictions. And that is important because it will continue no matter who is in office at the national level. And so I think really underscores the power of subnational jurisdictions and this sort of regional approach, I think, to climate action that is growing even more so. And we're going to see this, I hope, highlighted at COP30 and some of the local action initiatives that will be highlighted. So the Under 2 Coalition is a key sort of leverage point for us. Two others that I'll just mention, because I think it's important that you also know that California is not alone in the United States either. There are other allies to continue this work with. We're part of America is All In and the U.S. Climate Alliance. Our Governor Newsom, is co-chairing the America is All In coalition this year, which comprises collectively over 2/3 of the United States population and over 70% of U.S. GDP. So again, two other important coalitions of folks within the United States who remain committed to climate action, who remain committed to our international agreements as well as our domestic work, despite what's going on at the national level. So I would say first and foremost, I think leveraging the power in numbers, the power of coalitions, the power of partnership is always something that California has certainly relied on. We know that we cannot get there alone, and that's sort of in the international field, but I also think it's important to note the power of working within your own states to leverage, the influence of mayors, of regional government entities, of universities in particular. Some of the success that we've had in California has been through partnerships with our UC system, partnerships with our university system. We launched an Arches initiative on a hydrogen hub in California in partnership with our UCs. We were able to leverage, several billions of dollars across California for hydrogen exploration, for hydrogen development through that partnership as well. And so I think those types of partnerships are also incredibly important, as well as, of course, with the private sector. With businesses, we do quite a bit with auto manufacturers as well to continue to move toward meeting the emission reductions that we need to see.
Thank you. And yeah, great to hear of all that is going on despite sort of a very challenging context. One trend that I would be very keen to get your thoughts on, Christina, is the fact that we've seen a rise in climate litigation cases over the recent years, and litigation cases that are across a number of jurisdictions. To what extent do you think this is helping the implementation of the Paris Agreement?
Well, we've heard from the scientists and the previous speakers that climate change is a complex issue. It's demanding. It needs all hands on board, and that includes, of course, also the courts, the judicial branch in a democratic system, in addition to the legislator and the executive. And you were talking about pushing back in court. What we're now currently seeing here in Europe is a fascinating moment, is more pushing forwards in court, where we really see a wave of climate litigation, which was pretty much spurred by the adoption and entry into force of the Paris Agreement in 2016, where we see in many member states cases that aim at increasing the level of ambition in climate targets, or the effective and just implementation of climate acts. And what the courts do is primarily base their findings, their judgments, on constitutional provisions, on human rights acts, or on procedural provisions, for example, environmental impact assessment. But in many cases, they use the Paris Agreement, in particular the 1.5-degree goal, as a means of interpreting these legal tools. They do not apply the Paris Agreement directly, but use it to strengthen already existing obligations that states and companies have in domestic law. Now, what is new for the last 2-3 years or so is that climate litigation has bubbled up to the international level, where suddenly supranational courts are involved. About a year ago, we had a very profound judgment coming down from the European Court on Human Rights in Strasbourg, using the European Convention as a tool to strengthen climate action, in that case by Switzerland. But what the court did was it interpreted the European Convention in the light of the Paris Agreement. And again, it used the 1.5-degree target to inform what it means to protect the life to privacy and private life under the European Convention. So this, in my view, is a strengthening of the Paris Agreement when it informs other obligations that states have. Or again, also 1 year ago, we received an advisory opinion from the International Tribunal on the Law of the Sea, which interpreted the Law of the Sea Convention in the context of the Paris Agreement, and found that all greenhouse gas emissions are pollution of the marine environment, and therefore states have the obligation to reduce and control emissions from all sources, including land-based sources. So these are interesting developments where other international obligations are interpreted in the light, especially of the temperature goal and the corresponding pathways and timelines of the Paris Agreement. And what is happening now this year is that in about 2 weeks from now, we will most likely receive another advisory opinion from the Inter-American Court on Human Rights, which traditionally has been a very progressive court in combining human rights and environmental protection. It's going to be very interesting to see what that court has to say. And then, of course, the pinnacle of it all is the advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice, the highest judicial organ, the World Court of the UN system, which is supposed to render an advisory opinion a little later this year. There is still a question of when is this going to come, but it probably will come before the COP. Well, and it's going to be interesting to see whether that plays into the COP, because we see independent and parallel legal obligations now to the Paris Agreement to reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
Great, thank you. So some promising developments, but also some important decisions expected. One of the factors that is seen as crucial to advance climate policy is public support. And we see over and over public opinion polls that show that there's widespread public concern for climate change and support for action across large parts of the world. And yet we see also governments struggling to translate that support into support for actual policy implementation in many instances. And so the question is, like, how can we better tap into that public support? This is obviously quite a complex topic, but I'd be keen to get your reflection, and then I might come to you, Secretary Garcia. So Luisia, you've looked at the role of digital technology and how it mediates public information and engagement. Can you comment on how you see it sort of shaping the public debate on climate?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much. I think what we see is that around the world, infrastructures of delay are holding back climate action. Some are powered by fossil fuels, others are powered by algorithms. If fossil infrastructures extract from land and bodies, digital infrastructures extract from attention and truth. Both serve the same function, to prolong business as usual. And we've heard so much discourse around the Climate Week about disinformation and misinformation, but how does it play out? Public engagement depends on shared truths, but the systems that are mediating public information today, platforms, algorithms, AI-generated content, are optimized for engagement, not necessarily accuracy. Climate disinformation then has evolved. It no longer needs to deny science outright. It reframes climate science. It reframes urgency as alarmism, action as extremism, and systematic transformation as unrealistic. These narratives flourish because they're engineered to perform well emotionally, algorithmically, and financially. It's long gone the idea that disinformation is called by a mistake or it's generated by uneducated people that are spreading lies. No, those who feed this network are usually professional content producers. There's a recent research that came out that said that just 10 websites, the so-called toxic 10, most of them funded by fossil fuels, generate 70% of climate disinformation circulating on social media today. So what it happens is that these actors exploit the lack of regulation, and the platforms actually profit from it. That's why I think if you work in the climate space, you should absolutely be paying attention to how your countries and regions are regulating and enforcing digital policy. But here, the harms caused by this lack of action are not also evenly distributed. Climate disinformation disproportionately targets and silences those who are already structurally excluded. Indigenous voices, youth movements, racialized communities. So intersectional harm is also embedded in this climate disinformation system and coded into content moderation policies, or the lack of them. And this is something that I don't see us talking very often about, the role that platforms also have in generating climate fear. Now with generative AI, this is really intensifying. This dynamic is getting so much deeper and stronger. Now, in a few seconds, you can produce synthetic reports, you can create fake experts, and hyper-real videos and images that overwhelm the public sphere. What happens is that truth becomes harder to find and even harder to trust. And here what we have to counter that, apart from regulation, which we all know, is also the power of civil society. I'm representing Equilabs, which is a digital rights lab reframing how data and AI work and how they're built and governed. It's important to really support those who are working across research, policy, and advocacy to actually confront the digital infrastructures that enable climate disinformation, and then help institutions build systems that are actually rooted in transparency, equity, and public oversight. Organizations like Equilabs, in a landscape built to confuse, we're helping rebuild the conditions for trust. So I want to finish by saying that we cannot protect climate unless we also protect the truth. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And in fact, it's worth highlighting that the COP30 presidency has indicated that misinformation will be one of the themes also addressed at the summit later this year. Remaining on the subject of sort of public concern and public engagement, we've heard from the presentation from Dr. Otto about the fact that climate-driven extreme weather events are becoming more likely and more severe. In principle, they should act as a wake-up call and as a catalyst for really mobilizing public opinion in favor of ambitious climate action. The question is that really the case? And I'd be keen to get your reflections, Secretary Garcia. What have you learned from the response to the wildfires in Southern California? And whether you have sort of broader reflections also on how can we really tap into that public concern to advance climate policy?
Sure. Well, as many of you know, California experienced some of the most devastating wildfires, certainly in our history as a state, earlier this year, affecting large swaths of the Los Angeles area. I think an area that where most residents might not have thought of climate risk being so real for them in such an expansive and overwhelming way. We're still in the midst of recovery. We've been focused on removing debris and getting critical infrastructure back up and running, but certainly nowhere near the rebuilding that we need to see to get people back into their homes. I'd say a couple of things in terms of the response. Unfortunately, I don't know that it's been a moment necessarily where people associate the need for accelerated climate action per se with the wildfires, but they do associate certain things that are related to climate action. One, resilience and the need to adapt to a changing climate. And two, the need to search for funding sources to help to recover from these sorts of devastating emergencies that happen. Before the wildfires, are sort of not including the recent wildfires, and those estimations are in the several tens of billions of dollars. California had about $16 billion annually in losses caused by climate change, caused by storms, caused by wildfires, and other related climate disasters. We know this because we are one of the largest economies to enter into the fray of climate nuisance litigation against the largest oil producers based on their deceptive practices in continuing to feed the addiction to fossil fuels while knowing what the impact of climate change would be. But figuring out how to foot that bill is a priority. We're seeing insurance companies leave the state. We're seeing them require much more in terms of conditions in order to issue policies. We're also seeing, of course, the devastating impacts of infrastructure that fall on our local, municipal, and county governments who, in Los Angeles, I wouldn't venture to say Los Angeles is not well off per se compared to many other cities and counties in the world, but is going to struggle with building out some of that critical infrastructure, particularly with water systems. So as we're looking ahead, I think for California, one of the critical priorities for us, again, is ensuring that our land use practices and the decision-making that we have around land use is done with resilience capacity in mind, is done with fire risk in mind, risks of storms and flood in mind as well, and that means connecting many of our communities to critical infrastructure that they might not otherwise have, adapting some of that infrastructure to meet the moment of impacts that they will be seeing, and working together with, across housing advocates, across transportation advocates, and not necessarily thinking about this as just a sort of, not to minimize the need to drastically reduce emissions, we still have that, but to think about it more broadly in terms of how we're meeting the need on, again, housing, transit, access, and certainly water supply.
Brilliant, thank you. We're going to open up to questions from the audience in a minute. I'm just going to ask one question to Yana, and sort of now very much looking ahead at COP30 and how we mobilize action in the lead up to Berlin. This is a crucial year as countries have to submit their updated NDCs. We've heard from Professor Yuri Rögel that time is really running out, and yet the US has pulled out of the Paris Agreement. China has not yet submitted their NDC. We've seen countries also slashing their international aid budgets. There's a lot of disagreement still on a lot of the agenda items that will be on the table at COP30. Is there scope really to revitalize climate ambition, and what will be the EU's priorities in the lead up to COP30?
Thank you. Speaking under the surveillance of the Brazilian presidency, of course, and I think at COP we will have an opportunity to have a honest conversation on the NDC that will have been submitted by COP30. We know that the synthesis report from UNFCCC will say that we are not on track, and it's an easy prediction, unfortunately. And we will have to say to each other, leading with the major economies and major emitters, what are we going to do about it? We have a clear agenda that was established in COP28, the global stocktake, and it tells us what we have to do to accelerate mitigation already in this critical decade. We have to act on our energy systems, on transport, we have to mobilize low carbon technologies, we have to stop deforestation, we know what we have to do. I think that COP should be the space where we will tell what we're doing, again, major economies leading, and that this will be captured in a plan that will take us to the next global stocktake to show that we have done better. And this is for mitigation, but also on finance. We have another great opportunity led by the Brazilian presidency, which is the Baku to Belém roadmap that should take us to mobilize 1.3 trillion per year. It is very difficult, but this means first that each dollar or euro of public money mobilized will have to be more effective and mobilize a lot of private money. And second, that we will have to be all creative and to mobilize innovative sources and instruments. And third, that we have to get over the idea that finance is just an affair for developed countries, but that it is everybody's responsibilities. There are a lot of economies that can contribute. The receiving countries can also create conditions for investment. We have to put all our forces together to make this a success, and we are committed in the EU to also give our contribution to this agenda. Last point, adaptation, very important for developing countries, very important for vulnerable countries, seeds and LDC. We will have to respond to them both on adaptation policies and on finance. And we hope that we will be able to do this at Belém.
Thank you. We're now going to open up for questions from the audience. We're going to try and take 2-3 questions. So please do raise your hands so that they're actually visible. I see there's a hand here in the front. There's a hand in the middle there, and there's a hand at the very back.
Hello, thank you very much.
If you can say your name and affiliation. If
yeah, hi, my name is Ziad. So my question is in regards to climate finance, and have there been any discussions in regards to stranded assets, and if there are any suggestions about financial infrastructure that could be developed to kind of mitigate stranded assets without actually consuming them? And the second question,
If we can just do one question only, if that's okay, just in the interest of time. There was a hand in the middle there.
Hello, thank you for everything, organizing this. I'm Sanjibita and I'm from India. So my question is, so in rural India, women are the first to feel the impact of water scarcity, crop failure, and any impact of water, climate crisis. So my question is, how can international climate finance better prioritize grassroots resilience over top-down solutions?
Thank you. And then there was a final question. There was a hand there in the very back, behind by the column. Back.
Hi there, thanks so much. My name is Ed King from an organisation called GSCC. We've heard lots of warm words today about the European Union and its leadership. But if you read Politico today, that it says France, Poland and Hungary now want to delay the EU's NDC. The EU is already late in delivering its NDC. What kind of message does the panel think a late, delayed European NDC 2035 climate target sends the rest of the world?
Thank you. So I'm going to ask the panel to each give a response to the question that speaks more to you. And also feel free to include any very short final remarks for this discussion. So I might start from Luisia, and then just will work back along these various speakers.
Perfect. So I'll be responding to the question on bringing grassroots to climate action. And I think here also connecting it to the theme of the COP, me as a Brazilian, this has been a topic that has been really much at the core of my work. This year, the Brazilian government has proposed the idea of a mutirão, to bring more people into climate action, especially for COP. And for those of you who don't speak Portuguese or who don't know what that is, basically a mutirão is a form of collective action where people come together to solve a task that usually the state has failed to deliver. So it can be painting houses or building a school or whatever. And the Brazilian presidency has been really pushing into this topic, into bringing a mutirão of ideas to climate action. But I think that here, what I really want to also push is that this is really, when we want to bring different voices, we can't sort of rely on inclusion. Access is not equality. It's not just about having access to these platforms. It's also about making sure that we also have decision-making power. And here, I'm also speaking as a young person. It also means bringing youth as negotiators, as core aspects of the climate action. So I just wanted to say that there are ways to do this and ways to push that forward, but we really need those strong actors willing to sort of push a little bit forward and kind of get over their discomfort and sharing power with those who are, at the grassroots.
Thank you. Nancy, any response from you?
You have to.
So I think I put a pal over the audience when I was like, it's not only business. Was not lost upon me that nobody clapped. So let me now further refine that in response to some of the questions especially about signals, and I think that's what I was trying to communicate at the end of a long day. The signals that, just a quick question. So who here drives an electric car? Who invested in the heat pump in their home? Okay. Who actually, who has, I know there's a bit of maybe shaping, fast fashion? Who participates in fast fashion? Okay. So signal number one, right? You want companies to change behavior through decarbonization. I come from industrial decarbonization. It's not inexpensive. One of the things that they respond to is you. The things that I mentioned, going to electric cars, doing heat pumps in your home, increasing the energy efficiency, that costs you money. You're not doing that, but you want business to do it. Enough said on that one. The second is signals, right? So you had a good call out. So, what's omnibus? Right? Where are the investments? I'm sorry, how many of the COP, this makes me really unpopular, they're probably not going to give me a glass of wine. How many of the actual funds that have been agreed upon, lost funds and such, have actually been fully funded? Oh, I'm sorry? So this is a surface, but so this is what I'm saying. You can't expect the panels to sit up here. You can't look at these numbers where everything's red. You could have just stopped there and all of us went like, yep. And then have where's the business in this? At the end of the day, what business does need to do is need to see a clear signal, both from a private sector perspective, you as customers, you speaking for your own companies, and from regulatory, as well as the fact that they need to see that this is something that they can do when they do make an investment, and this gets to the changing garden, that they have a runway to do it. And it's just been really tough. So I will leave you with something very positive, which is the fact that you did ask a question. Have they stepped away from commitments? In today's regulatory environment, when you have basically a government, you're looking at me like, I'm California, I don't run the federal, but I'm so sorry. When you basically have a superpower, in essence, declare war on climate, right? Let's just call it what it is. I'm sorry, is that a really good time for you to be standing up saying, well, let me launch this climate initiative? So don't get into the misinformation. There is so much that companies are doing right now, and they're doing it because they are responding to their environment. The adaptation is not lost on them, right? Tariffs are a great advertisement for circularity, all of a sudden wanting to source from local businesses. So I'm just saying that it is a very complex conversation, and businesses are there, but maybe not as open as they used to be.
Thank you. And
my self-esteem needed that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure some of the other panelists will have views on this, but I'm going to ask Secretary Garcia to provide your remarks if we can keep them, again, brief in the interest of time. Thank
Okay,
you.
I'm going to go back to the questions, although there's a lot to respond to for sure. I will just say, just quickly on the timing for NDCs and some of the climate finance, just for what it's worth from the subnational perspective, I think two quick things. One, getting more of the sort of climate finance discussion applicable to, again, subnational governments and local governments, and action on the ground is something that is a high priority for us and the coalitions that we're a part of. Two, I think on the NDCs piece, one of the things that I think also just emphasizes the critical role that subnational local governments play is that we can actually meet those targets. So we can continue the momentum to bring down emissions. And one of the biggest things that we're pushing for, not only at the COP, but just in general, is a recognition of our inventories, of our plans, which in California, we're very lucky to have an economy-wide scoping plan that gets us to carbon neutrality by 2045. It requires about a 90% reduction in fossil fuels, which is a huge challenge for us. I don't mean to undermine how hard that is going to be, but something that we really want to be able to put forward, and I think gets to some of the pressure on nation states to really meet those targets as well. And then finally, on some of the support for grassroots organizations and community-based groups through our Cap and Trade or Cap and Invest program, which to date has generated about $33 billion in investment, we have focused 70% of those investments in disadvantaged communities, communities that are low income, communities that are most heavily pollution burdened all across our state. And some of that money does in fact go toward supporting organizations that participate in pollution reduction work and that participate in much of our regulatory processes, and that's been a critical part and component of our climate regulatory action, and certainly of our Cap and Invest program that we're proud of, and I think a model that others may want to consider as they consider carbon trading programs as well.
Brilliant, thank you. Christina, over to you for a response and any reflections on how to really keep focus on implementation of the Paris Agreement.
Yeah, I was actually just saying that most of the questions, if not all three, actually were focusing on implementation, right? Not so much on the COPs and the negotiation, but what happens on the ground. And I think here I'd like to commend the Brazilian incoming presidency to focus on implementation. It's an implementation COP, and that move away from negotiations and mega COPs to implementation COPs, I think it's overdue. It's absolutely crucial. Of course, the COP will still have formal agenda items, like this year it will be the global goal on adaptation and just transition, and a discussion on the outcome of the global stock tax. These formal agenda items will always be there, and there will be formal negotiations, but much happens now on the domestic, on the ground level, where the COPs really don't have that much to say. It's a matter of what happens domestically or in subnational jurisdiction. And that links back to the question of the gentleman who I can't just see right now on the NDCs. From my work in the compliance committee, I know that 171 parties did not communicate their NDC this year on time. The deadline was in February, and 171 parties received a letter from the compliance committee, but the committee extended the deadline to September in order to give time and possibilities to all these parties to come up with strong NDCs by the time that the COP comes around. But that's a matter of domestic, of national policy making, which is absolutely crucial. And I think that focus has now shifted also indicated by the incoming presidency in those wonderful explanatory letters which the president-elect sends out, where he, in this most recent letter, identified the action agenda and focused very strongly on the action agenda, which is a part of the wider COP ecosystem that focus on the involvement of private actors, where he outlined 6 axes, as he calls it, focusing on forests, on electricity, on the energy sector, on agriculture and so forth. And I think that's a very important focus to look on the actors that actually have an impact on the ground and building up and stimulating action and transformative changes that are necessary.
Brilliant, thank you. And Yana, last word, responding, I guess, to also some of the challenge in the room, but...
Yeah, I'm not going to hide behind the fact that everybody is late. We would have liked to publish, to adopt our 2040 target from which we will derive our NDC earlier this year. If we are adopting it only next week, it's because the Commission wanted to be sure that there would be a political agreement for this target to be accepted by our co-legislator, by the Council, so by the Member States and the European Parliament. And that's why it's coming out next week and it didn't come out in February. But the target will not disappoint. As I said, it's going to be ambitious, it's going to be in line with science and with what we announced last year. And it's going to be, this is to also respond a very clear signal to business that the European Union is staying the course. But I also wanted to make, if you allow me, a brief comment on business. It seems from what you said like that business doesn't have agency, that it's squeezed between the government that sets the regulatory environment and the consumer that has demand. But the businesses lobby governments in a very powerful way. And if in Europe there is a lot of backlash in this moment on climate action, it's also because all the businesses that have not been quick enough to equip themselves to compete are lobbying us to slow down climate action because they're saying it's too expensive and the US is stepping back, so we also have to step back. Before we say the US have IRA, they're going to ruin us, and now they're coming with the opposite argument. So I think business can do a lot, and I'm not saying that they don't do it, because I always appeal to progressive business, to those that are equipped, that have made, that 30% of European GDP that is coming from the clean transition. Please raise your voice, come and lobby our politicians, because you can help us. So I appeal on business to help us in this journey, because it is a bumpy ride. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We're going to have to bring the panel to a close, but really thank you all for your insights. Thank you for your questions. Please give a round of applause to our speakers, and then